Okay, here we go. Hello, hello. Chapter 1, Building Blocks of Relationships. So in addition to wondering if you're going to learn something, I'm wondering how long we can go before one of my two dogs starts barking. And then when one starts, the other one starts. So, throughout these lectures, it's not going to be perfect. But I mean, I tell myself that it wouldn't be perfect within a classroom too. If I was in front of you in a classroom, sometimes I'll stumble over my words. Sometimes I'll get out of sync with what I'm saying with the slides and I'll backtrack or go ahead. So, the lectures that I record are not going to be perfect, but they wouldn't be perfect online either. So this is just a picture of your textbook, so you remember what it looks like. Now, this is the first chapter, and the chapter begins with this kind of fictional scenario in which the author suggests that for the vast majority of people, being completely by themselves for an extended period of time is something they wouldn't like. So we may joke that we'd like to be by ourselves and have everybody leave us alone, but that actually it would bother us, even if they thought they could have everything they could ever want. And I can't help but think that all of us would consider this scenario one way before the COVID-19 lockdown and a completely different way having gone through that. For a lot of people, they did indeed find the lockdown very difficult after the first few weeks, particularly single people who lived on their own. So your family or your roommate or your partner may drive you nuts a lot of the time, but at least you had somebody there with you. For example, I know my aunt in her 70s who is widowed, my mom in her late 80s who lives alone, and various friends who live alone without kids in the house found it really trying. And I get the sense that it put a lot of people in a position where they had to recognize just how much regular contact with other people meant to them, even if it was casual contact, not a deep conversation and for a short period of time. Because we as human beings are social creatures. Now, we're not the only creatures that are social, not by a long shot, but we are also social creatures. You might argue that some people are simply built different, that they're antisocial and they don't need a lot of contact with others. And you're right. But the key here is that they don't need a lot of contact with others, meaning they still need some. And keep in mind, there are different ways to have that need for contact met. So maybe you don't feel the need to be around people physically, but you constantly keep in touch with them electronically, or you have real-time conversations in chat rooms or through Skype or through something else. I happen to be one of those people who don't feel a need for constant human contact. I can go weeks without seeing another person and it doesn't bother me. My name is Jennifer and I have an antisocial personality. But at the same time that I don't have as much of a need for actual physical contact, I do want to keep in touch with people. Texting, emailing, and as part of the middle age group, we tend to like Facebook. So this need, whether you recognize it as an actual need or not, is in fact a real need and it can be met in different ways. The point is, human beings are social creatures. We are not created to be 100% unsocial, introverted creatures. And your text makes the point that it's because a lack of human contact is so detrimental that prisons used to routinely use it as a form of punishment. So for those inmates who were especially disruptive or who were assessed as a risk to other inmates or the prison staff, they would be sent to solitary confinement, which meant being placed in a small cell by themselves, and they would have little to no meaningful contact with anybody. And this practice actually goes far back, right up to the 1800s, but it's slowly been phased out as a routine method of punishment in prisons because it has increasingly been viewed as cruel and unusual punishment because of the potential for mental health problems as a result of solitary confinement. Now, research indicates it can cause very serious mental health issues like depression, severe anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and being isolated can even affect a person physically. But this does still exist in some prisons. And again, the reason is because it has long been recognized that not having contact with other people not having relationships with other people, not having meaningful relationships with others is detrimental. It's a punishment. Can other people seem to drive us nuts, get under our skin, make us want to rip our hair out? Absolutely. Maybe you have what's referred to as a love-hate relationship with somebody, but on some level, you still need them. So this all comes down to intimacy. And realize that intimate and intimacy does not refer to anything sexual, although this is a term that is regularly used incorrectly to refer to something sexual. Oh, sorry. See, my notes are out of whack. That's what you get for playing with your dogs when you should be preparing. So you'll hear somebody, they have an intimate relationship, meaning they have a sexual relationship, but that's actually not accurate. Intimacy, intimate, and intimate relationship simply means a close personal relationship with somebody. This is not exactly what the text says, but it's accurate, simple, and straightforward. A close personal relationship. So that for the purpose of clarity and organization in your own head, just pick somebody in your life that you currently have a close personal relationship with, or you did in the past. And think of them when I discuss exactly what an intimate relationship is. So this is a basic definition. An intimate relationship is a close personal relationship. But it can also be a very complicated one because what does that really mean? When you have a close personal relationship with somebody, when you have an intimate relationship with them, it specifically refers to these different characteristics that I've listed here. Knowledge, interdependence, caring, trust, responsiveness, mutuality, and commitment. If you have an intimate relationship with somebody, that means you must have a lot of knowledge about them, much more than you would have for somebody you have a more casual relationship with. So for the person you choose to keep in mind, you probably know a lot about them, what they like, what they don't like, from music to food to TV to clothes, and a few hundred other things. I know that my partner doesn't particularly like parsnips. So when I make a stew and I put them in because I like them, when we eat without saying a word, he automatically picks them off his plate and puts them on mine. And if I notice he's forgotten one, I just reach over with my fork and stab it. I know how he takes his coffee. He knows I don't drink coffee at all. I can't stand it. I know what topics not to make jokes about because for certain reasons he doesn't find them particularly funny, and vice versa. So having an intimate relationship with somebody means you know a lot more about them than just general knowledge. So in the examples I just gave you, if he were to openly speak about any of that with other people, it wouldn't matter. I don't care if people know I don't like coffee. But we don't share really personal knowledge about each other with other people. Within an intimate relationship, you just don't do that because that's considered intimate, confidential information. You might think you know a cashier at the grocery store that you see every week, but you don't really know any personal, confidential information about them, do you? Because that's not an intimate relationship. I do want to point out, though, that this doesn't mean everybody you have an intimate relationship with knows every single little thing. It depends on the nature of the relationship. And even in the closest, most intimate relationship, there may be things you decide to keep to yourself. There are certain things I don't share with my mom, for example, and we're extremely, extremely close. And that's okay. There's no rule book that says you have to tell somebody, even if it's your intimate partner, every single little detail. I'm sure some do, but if you don't, that's okay. Now, something else that's typical of an intimate relationship is that you'll develop an interdependency on each other, which just means you're going to rely on each other, and that in many ways, what you do will affect them and vice versa. Another way of saying that you rely on somebody is saying that you develop a need for them, which, let's be honest, can be a scary thing. It can be intimidating to leave yourself open like that. Because if you rely on somebody, that means you're trusting that they'll be there for you. So what if at some point they're not? I think we would automatically think of a romantic partner when we think of interdependency, but this can also apply to friends, to family members. Maybe in the past you've been really disappointed in a close friend because they felt they let you down, or your parents or a sibling, or they affected you in some way that was negative. Something else that distinguishes an intimate relationship from other more casual acquaintances is simply caring. Coming back to the example of the cashier at the grocery store, you don't care for them in the same manner you care for somebody you have a close personal relationship with. But with the people that you do, the level of caring you have for them and the intensity of the caring you have for them is very different. When you have a close personal relationship, there should be a pretty high level of trust. And this can be interpreted in several ways. In a romantic relationship, you trust that they're going to be faithful to you. And usually when this is not fulfilled, the relationship ends or it's at least damaged. Some people are able to truly get over that trust being broken. The majority do not. In any intimate relationship, even those that are not romantic, you trust that they will be good to you, that they'll be nice to you, treat you well, that they'll be considerate of you, and that they'll always have your best interests at heart. All of those things. For example, maybe you've had somebody tell you that a close friend of yours has said something derogatory about you, that they were talking about you behind your back. And your immediate reaction is, no, I don't believe it. I just know they wouldn't. Because you have that sense of trust in them. Maybe you've had somebody tell you they saw your boyfriend or girlfriend flirting with somebody, and you immediately say, no way, they wouldn't do that. And I don't mean in a you're in denial kind of way. I mean, you honestly know they wouldn't do that. And you tell the person they must have misinterpreted the situation. And hopefully you were right. Another characteristic typical of intimate relationships that really sets it apart from a more casual relationship is responsiveness. And this means a lot more than just reacting to somebody. It means you actively engage in communicating with them and responding to them. So you recognize what they need and you respond to that because you care about them on a deeper level and you care about their well-being on a deeper level. So you see something is bothering them and you respond to that. You see that they need to talk about something or that they're really happy. So you are responsive to them, you're tuned into them, you react to them, and you're open to being responsive to them. And even if your intimate relationship is not a romantic one, on some level, this level of intimacy makes you feel truly connected to the person, like you're a pair. So there's a commonality between you, an interconnection. The text refers to this as mutuality, meaning you both recognize that you have this close, intimate relationship with each other. So it isn't I am a friend, it's we are friends. And it might seem a little odd to you to think of intimate relationships other than romantic relationships in this way, but it does apply. But yes, viewing your intimate relationships with somebody in terms of mutuality is certainly more common in a romantic relationship. Your text refers to something called the inclusion of other in the self scale, which is also known as the self-expansion model. And don't just gloss over this, it's a pretty neat concept. It was developed in 1922 by a social psychologist named Arthur Aaron and his colleagues. And what this does is it measures how close a person feels with another person or with a group of people. In other words, it was designed to measure the degree of mutuality a person feels. And it's called the IOS for short, because always writing or saying inclusion of the other in the self scale is, quite a mouthful. And it's been given to a very wide variety of people. People as young as 5 years old. In 2006, it was used in a study called changing children's intergroup attitudes towards refugees, testing different models of extended contact. Sounds really academic, doesn't it? It's been used with people who were previously incarcerated, and a study called Connectedness to the Criminal Community and the Community at Large predicts 1 year post-release outcomes among felony offenders. It's been used to assess people on a low income in a study called Inclusion of Community in Self Scale, a single item pictorial measure of community connectedness. And there are many, many, many more examples, but this gives you an idea of how widely applicable the iOS is, not just with intimate relationships that are romantic, but for all relationships, to measure how connected people feel to other people. Because feeling connected to others can affect so many things as an individual, and thus, as an extension, affect all of society. So what this scale does is it assesses how much a person feels they overlap with others. It essentially measures the degree of mutuality people feel they have with others. So, intimate relationships differ from more casual relationships in terms of knowledge and interdependence, caring, trust, responsiveness, mutuality, and finally, commitment. I think this is another dimension that makes most of us automatically think of romantic relationships, and certainly they are included in this. Either you are romantically committed to somebody or not. Now, this makes me think of high school and all the times couples would get into fights because one thought they were on a break, whatever exactly that means. So they would be, in theory, free to see other people. And their first partner would hear about it and freak out. So one person thought their commitment to each other was temporarily suspended, so to speak, and the other didn't see it this way. This also makes me of the TV show Friends, when Ross was always saying, "I thought we were on a break," in regards to his relationship with Rachel. In a romantic relationship especially, that commitment is crucial. But realize that different people have different ideas for themselves about what commitment means. And just because somebody else's structure of commitment doesn't match yours, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with their relationship. In a romantic relationship, the majority of us automatically perceive that to mean two people who are committed to each other. And if that is what both people want and believe in, good for them. They may be 100% committed to each other. But for them, commitment includes an open relationship. So even they're totally committed to each other, they are also completely okay with each other having sexual relations with other people. And if these are consenting adults who are truly okay with it, then who are we to judge? Now, we may look at that couple and say, no way, that's totally crazy. They don't have a good relationship. You know, they say they're a couple, but then they're with other people. But for them, they truly feel it doesn't affect their commitment to each other. But this idea of a commitment also applies to other intimate relationships, such as those with friends. So you do, in a certain sense, have a commitment to your friends. And because of this, you feel your intimate relationship with your friends will always be there. And if you didn't have that commitment to maintaining a close personal relationship with your friends, well, then they wouldn't be your close friends. And I want to point out, in regards to intimate relationships, there is absolutely no checklist here that says all of these characteristics must be present at all times at the same level, or your relationship is doomed to failure, or that you don't have a truly close personal relationship with somebody. There is a great deal of flexibility here in terms of each one of these dimensions being wholly 100% present, to maybe even being wholly 100% absent, and anywhere in between. And if a dimension is completely there 100% or completely absent 100%, that doesn't mean it can't change. We can all think of examples of people we know in our lives that had really intense, close relationships that did not possess every single one of these. Or the relationship really seemed to ebb and flow up and down over time. Believe it or not, some people have very close, intimate relationships of a romantic nature over years, but they don't have a strong feeling of commitment. But it works for them. Or let's be honest, it works for only one of them, but the other doesn't end the relationship for some reason. Some people spend decades in an intimate relationship where they simply do not have a high degree of trust in their partner. Or they have a friend that they're really close to, even though their friend has a relatively low degree of responsiveness with them. I don't think anybody has perfect relationships. Maybe I shouldn't be a pessimist and say, okay, maybe some do, but I would strongly argue that 99.9% of us do not with our romantic partners or our friends. But that doesn't mean that they're not still close personal relationships. So human beings are inherently social creatures. We not only like having contact with others, we need to have contact with others in order to be healthy and thus happy. And I mean, in terms of what it means to be happy, well, that would be a whole other discussion, probably very philosophical in nature. And it isn't simply having contact with people in the grocery store, in the mall, saying hi to somebody as you pass by when you go for a walk. It's specifically a human need for close relationships, for close personal relationships. That doesn't mean a whole ton of them. It may be just a few. And there are absolutely no hard and fast rules for exactly the structure of those intimate relationships, but they are needed. Now, in the text, it specifically says that we all have a need to belong. I wish the author had not used this phrasing and instead had said we all have a need to be needed, because that's really what's being said. And I want to be clear here. This is not just an opinion. It's not just some philosophical or flaky comment on human interaction. No, real research indicates that a lack of intimate relationships has a detrimental effect on people, not just mentally, physically as well. We know that overall a person will be happier, which just makes sense, if they have intimate relationships with other people. But having intimate relationships, not necessarily a lot of them, even just one or two, can actually affect a lot of things. One example the author provides is that people let's try that again. People seem to actually feel pain less if they look at a picture of their intimate romantic partner. So this is from a study conducted in 2009 at the University of California in LA, when 28 women were placed in a testing room and their partner was placed in another room to have their picture taken. A woman's pain threshold was determined by placing a thermal stimulator on 3 different parts of her arm, and then it was repeated again on her other arm while she looked at a picture of her partner. Now, I don't know who came up with this idea or how they did. It isn't something I would ever think of, but it's kind of interesting, isn't it? We know that people who do not have these kinds of relationships are at risk. As just another example that's cited in your text, in a study called Loneliness and Social Isolation as Risk Factors for Coronary Heart Disease and Stroke, Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis of Longitudinal Observational Studies. Wow, that's long. This was conducted in 2016. So let's kind of pare this down to something we can digest and understand easily. What this study indicated was that people who have poor social relationships have a 29% increased chance of heart disease and a 32% increased chance of a stroke. And there was no difference according to gender here. Oh, I've got a little spelling mistake on my slide. 32% risk of stroke. Now, I was already aware of this because I'd read about this before, that people who are married tend to live longer than people who are not, even if it's not a happy marriage. Why? Because even if it's not a happy marriage, at least there's somebody else there. Somebody else to do things with for you, somebody else to help you. You know, you're ill, you need somebody to look after the house, let the dog in and out, get prescriptions, that kind of thing. Maybe you know somebody who's much older, whose spouse died, and then they died shortly after as well. It's almost like the loss of that intimate relationship was too much for them. So having a close personal relationship with at least 1 to 2 people really does, in every sense, affect not only our mental health, but our physical health. We may not completely understand the connection, scientifically speaking, how this works, but all research indicates that this is true.